Hello ladies and gentlemen, we are Northern Knights Gaming and we welcome you to the first installment of our lore series. A series where we go through the weird and esoteric races and cultures that populate the war-filled galaxy of 40K. Since this is our first installment, I thought we could start with the oldest and most technologically advanced race in all of 40K, the Necrons, or the Necrontyr as some of the older races will remember them as. This race has a very old and deep history, full of rising past predetermined frailty and death, technological development the galaxy has never seen and most likely will never see again, political unrest on par with the Horus Heresy, and the very heavy price required to keeping a galaxy-spanning empire in a single piece. In our episode today, we'll be going over the early days of the Necrons, their former organic biology, their technology, and what forged them into the beings they are now. These early days are filled with despair, grueling hardships, hope found but quickly lost, and the seeds of the hateful jealousy for all organic beings that is found in almost every single member of this ancient race. Now, with talking and researching subjects so old, time is our worst enemy, for it steals the vast amount of information on any subject it touches. So what we know about the Necrons is from sources that could be called biased in their retellings, since the vast majority of information we have is from Eldari script, or from what machines we could access on pillaged tomb worlds. Both of these sources always vary wildly in their credibility, since, well, there is not a single race in the galaxy that hates the Necrons more than the Eldari, and, well, any tomb world humanity can access and decode are, well, degraded would be the best term to describe those. With this in mind, let us begin our delve into the Necrons with their ever so genocidal tendencies. To understand why the Necrons became the egotistical, robotic empire builders that they are in the 41st millennium, we must first start back more than 60 million Terran years, to when they first popped up on their homeworld, somewhere deep in the region known as the Halo Stars. The Halo Stars are a place right on the edge of the Milky Way galaxy, and known as a death trap to any would-be explorer for a variety of reasons. From pirates, to hostile Xenos, to warp monstrosities, you can always find death in the Halo Stars. And in this system, on the edge of the known void, over 60 million years ago, the humanoid beings called the Necrontyr lived. And it was a truly pitiful existence indeed, for their own star, whose light gave them life, also gave them high amounts of ionized radiation in the form of radiation wind and storms. And between the cancers and myriad other health problems this caused, it cut their lifespans down greatly.
The wind blew stronger than normal today. Even with my radiation protection, I could feel it. I could feel my body's cells contorting under the barrage of the wind, but I could do nothing about it, for the crops needed tending and I was their tender. From the traders we get, I hear stories from the crown worlds and their farms that are in great structures to protect the tenders. But for me, being in the field with my back to the wind was just the way I like it, for it's just as the Pharaon said, the winds bring you closer to your rest, so work till your hands are raw to make your ancestors welcome you in with open arms.
Now, you will most likely be asking yourself the logical question. How on Terra did biological life even form on that planet in the first place? And, while it is just this researcher's opinion, it could follow the same principles as certain species of microorganisms found on Terra. Like these tiny Terran creatures, they too could have evolved a great resistance to radiation, but not an immunity, hence their lifespan reduction and other woes. With death being so close to every member of their species, it created a culture where life was viewed as a mere momentary bit of suffering, before the reward of death finally claims them, and they are added to the momentous crypts and tombs that their ancestors reside in. As you can probably tell, this made a culture of beings who venerated death in all they did, and it would not be a leap to think that they worship death in all but name, seeing it as a salvation for them.
It was a day like any other. Wake from my spacious pod, clean myself in my family's wash bin, don my ceremonial robes, and head to the temple. For I am a caretaker, and it is my sacred responsibility to keep the maintenance scarabs running properly. For their sacred duty lies in the continued functionality of the grand monolith of the sacred sleep. I do this day in, day out. For if I ever fail and the maintenance scarabs cease function, and the revered ancestors that reside within the great monolith receive dishonor, my reward of joining them in eternal peace is forever lost, and my pathetically short life will be for nothing.
Necrontyr culture was a class-based dynastic system, ranging from the bottom peasantry doing manual labor to the lesser nobles vying for the heads of their rivals. These nobles range from the lords, who are the lesser nobility, the overlords, who govern entire planets, to the incredibly powerful pharaohs, who control entire dynasties. However, at the top of Necrontyr society is undoubtedly the Triarch. The Triarch was a collection of the three most powerful pharaohs, and within those, the most powerful was named the Silent King and given leadership of the Triarch, and in turn, the whole Necrontyr race. This Triarch structure was not like the systems of ancient Terran societies, where it was one family that held the title forever. It was a non-hereditary title that changed hands upon death. And since the Necrontyr's lifespans were short, the being who had the title changed between the different powerful dynasties quite often. The strange part about this system is that the Silent King didn't talk themselves, but through the two other members of the Triarch. We have not found out why this is the case, since it seems to complicate the leader's position, but there are a couple theories proposed as to why the ancient Necrontyr had such a system. The first theory, and most accepted, is that this system made any decision the Triarch made an agreed plan from all three members, for it made the Silent King not be able to override his fellows via demands straight from his own mouth. Another theory states that the Silent King was merely a figurehead for the Necron race, and the responsibility of the Silent King was more of a unifying one, while any decision-making for the race as a whole was a unanimous or majority voting system, in which all three members had equal voting power. Either way, we don't know the true reason why the Triarch was formed. It was the form of government the Necrontyr had throughout the recorded history, and its legacy of success and failures can be found in Necrontyr society all the way till the present. Now, before we move on, there is another class of Necrontyr that warrants mention. They are the Cryptex. These beings were, and still are, the engineers, scientists, and general mechanics of the Necrontyr Empire, and while not nobles themselves, their responsibility and army of repair scarabs meant they held immense influence in the Necrontyr courts, to the point that even the most arrogant overlord would have to apologize if he slighted even a semi-influential Cryptek, lest see his incredibly advanced technology cease function at the most inopportune moment. I've been blessed with an extremely long life for my race. With that blessing, I've studied. Day after day, year after year, I've learned. And for my diligence, I'm now the one of only two Necrontyr in this system that know the entirety of my overlord's military weapons and their upkeep. I have made myself irreplaceable, and I know it. So when I was stripped of my position and thrown into a back alley post for little more than the new overlord wanting his third nephew in a position of importance, I knew what to do. For you see, I am approaching my 60th full solar rotation, and I have seen multiple overlords rise and fall in my time. I know how their noble minds work, and I prepared accordingly. So I waited, and finally, one full solar rotation later, as all new overlords do, he declared a subjugation war of a neighboring alien world. These aliens truly had no chance. Their minds were small, their technology prehistoric in comparison to ours, and they only had one world. Truly doomed creatures. But they are not going to fight my glorious overlord at his peak. Oh no, for I have a feeling that when the Overlord's troops hit that alien world, a series of unfortunate and catastrophic failures will befall his precious machinery. Energy cores will burn out, alignment crystals will misalign for no apparent reason, and in some interesting and high-profile cases, outright explode. killing or severely hurting the wielder. I look forward to my reinstatement upon my overlord or his successor's return. It is all going so very perfectly. Now, because of their homestar's violent temperament, it is no surprise that the Necrontyr pursued a variety of fixes for their ailments. And one of their more successful attempts was heading out to the stars for more temperate star systems. They accomplished this by using ships they called torch ships. These ships were primitive at best and used antimatter for propulsion, while the Necrontyr themselves resided in stasis crypts to wait out their slow journey to their destination. It is not said in any recovered data what happens to any Necrontyr that died during these star-spanning journeys. But knowing their culture of venerating the dead, we can theoretically rule out any old Terran customs of burial in the void, where the deceased is dressed in their finest clothes and launched into space, or one of the other varying ways Terran spacegoers disposed of their dead. Since abandoning one's body was seemingly unthinkable to the Necrontyr, whose whole purpose was to have a place to rest after their death. It can be strongly assumed that the Necrontyr made these torch ships with places to hold any potential casualties, but since there are no information on the subject in our recovered Necron cogitators, we can only speculate. One theory is that these torch ships were much like their worlds themselves, and that the most space was exclusively saved for any dead that the ship might gain in transport. Another theory is that the Necrontyr were more utilitarian in their ship design than their world design, and kept a small area to hold any cadavers that might gain, while the rest was for the still living crew. The most contested theory is that the name torch ship is more literal than first thought, and those who perish on board were incinerated on the ship and stored for later permanent storage. While the way the Necrontyr stored their dead is up for debate, the method of how they attempted to endure such long journeys is known. They used stasis crypts to hold their onboard populations and crew in suspended animation, much like the Imperium's own stasis fields. The data we have on these devices are few and far between, unfortunately, but it would indicate that the Necrontyr at this time had technology for protecting one's life, much like humanity does now in the 41st millennium. This is unsurprising, since their first and last battle as a species is with their own body's fragility and short lifespans. Back to their expansion into the universe, however. It was a slow but steady process in which the Necrontyr spread to become a fully fledged multi-system empire. It was at this time that the Necrontyr would find the most powerful mortal beings the galaxy has ever seen. They were a species of lizard humanoids that, to the Necrontyr, were in all intensive purposes immortal. From recovered Eldari and Necrontyr reports, these so-called Old Ones were beyond powerful, for their knowledge of the warp, or realm of souls, in which was its name at this time, was unmatched. The realm of souls is subject of intense debate, but from what is proven, it was the original form of the warp, a timeless place where every mortal emotion was reflected as tangible, and where every mortal soul went on the time of death for eternal rest. Mastery of this realm made the Old Ones be able to break the laws of the material universe that bound the Necrontyr, seemingly at their slightest whim, and they had used this power to colonize and populate the galaxy with intelligent life that they deeply cherished and nurtured for. Upon seeing these godlike beings, the Necrontyr were given hope, for there was a race in the galaxy that was blessed with such pain-free immortality, with none of the myriad health problems the Necrontyr suffered on a daily basis. This hope, however, was dashed when the Old Ones refused to share their knowledge of immortality with the Necrontyr, and thus their hope became jealousy, and then evolved to hatred towards the Old Ones and their intelligent creations, but never to outright hostility. This, however, was not the only disappointment the new Necrontyr Empire faced as it spread across the stars. The Necrontyr were still constrained to slow ships for their space travel, and as the different dynasties spread themselves to span entire systems, they started to resist the Triarch and its right to rule them. One after another, seeds of rebellion started to show, as the Triarch had no quick way to get to the farthest reaches of his empire to squash any sprouting rebellion before it took complete control of its surrounding area. The First War of Secession had begun, And it was a time of great unrest, distrust, rivalries, and for the first time, all-out war between the dynasties. With many dynasties in open rebellion, and their people getting more and more divided by the day, a major schism was all but guaranteed if the Triarch did not find some way to unify the dynasties under a common goal. To this end, the Triarch did find a unifying presence, but in that short-term salvation, they would doom their race, and the galaxy as a whole, to a fate none could have predicted. For the first war in heaven was being planned. The Triarch decided to unify their race by means of common enemy. And the enemy that fit perfectly was the hated Old Ones. Those ancient mystics that the whole of Necrontyr society hated. But if the Necrontyr could actually win the war was a whole nother matter. Necrontyr were mighty at this time. Indeed, their technology as a whole had advanced greatly in the years since they left the prison that was their homeworld. But to the Old Ones, their doomsday fleets were nothing more than guns mounted on tortoises. For if any Necrontyr ever met the Old Ones' fleet in battle, it would be a decent fight. But the Old Ones never needed to meet the Necrontyr in battle, for they had an ace in play that the Necrontyr could never match. It was called the Webway, and it was one of the most impressive and expansive feats of warp engineering the galaxy has ever seen. The Webway was created by the Old Ones by slicing a section off from the Sea of Souls, or warp if you want to call it that, and placing it in the veil between the Realm of Souls and real space. In this custom dimension of winding tunnels and impossible geometry, the Old Ones constructed gates to be able to enter and leave the dimension from real space, and spread said gates across the entire galaxy. How this was done is not known, and will most likely never be known again. However it was made, it let the Old Ones be able to, at will, move from one side of the galaxy to the other, in which they did with masterful precision and with devastating results for the Necrontyr. To give the Necrontyr credit, however, even with this immense advantage in their enemy's favor, the Necrontyr Empire was not weak in the slightest. Their warships, weapons, and technology in general far outweighed the Old Ones' own, minus the Old Ones' mastery over the Realm of Souls, however. The first war in heaven was a war of galactic scale. That only happens once in most species history. And it is said by the Eldari that the deeds done in that first war alone could fill a library in their own right.
It took 3 homeworld months, but the ancients finally are seeing the threat we are to them. It was most definitely the raising of their child's world in the Ferris system that woke them up to the declaration of war we gave them, and started taking it seriously. It just cost them 19 billion of their children. Funny how they claim such generosity and benevolence, but could do nothing when our fleets arrived in system and razed the planet in less than a day. Let us see if their refusal to help us in our time of need can save their valued children species from us now.
After a length that we can only speculate on, the Necrontyr just could not overcome the Old One's Webway, and the speed it gave them, and ended with the Necrontyr being regulated to a small corner of the galaxy, doomed to forever look at the Old Ones with an even bigger jealous hatred than before, but unable to muster the strength to be a threat ever again. At least, that was the Old One's planned fate for the Necrontyr. But the Necrontyr are used to fighting against destined fates, and this was just another to fight against. In their forgotten corner of the galaxy, and over the course of millennia, the Necrontyr's star-like fury towards the Old Ones cooled to a new level of anger. A complete and utter hatred for all other intelligent life in the galaxy, and an all-consuming determination to avenge themselves upon their most hated rival. But even with this hatred of others at an all-time high, the fragile unity that the Necrontyr had while embroiled in the First War in Heaven slowly splintered. For the War in Heaven lasted much longer than many dynasties had wanted or could handle. So when the war was lost and the Necrontyr reduced to a sniveling existence, all those who wanted to have peace with the Old Ones or saw the generations upon generations, planets upon planets, hero upon hero wasted in that unwinnable war were to say beyond fury with the Triarch and its outright refusal to end the bloodshed until the very last moment. Millions I've sent to the Triarch's military as tribute. Millions more I've sent under my own banner, and I've never seen the same rank-and-file soldier twice. They always go filled with hope, vengeance, justice, hatred. Any amount and combination of emotions fill their hearts, and all I can do was wave them goodbye, knowing I'll never see them again, and that I can't let them know that. I've tried so many times to get even the idea of peace with the Ancient Ones to the Triarch, and even with allies that were also tired of this worthless war, we saw the Triarch had closed their ears to us, and instead forced us to comply, with threats, blackmail, bribes, speeches, and many, many more ways of manipulation. Allies turned to staunch opposers, and friend became rival. We could never get enough to side with us at any one time to stop this horrible war, and the ending my family line saw coming has finally arrived. 368 billion souls. 368 billion souls were the cost to my dynasty to teach the Triarch the lesson my forefathers knew for free. 314 systems, 210 planets, and a population over 1 trillion. Now, after the biggest failure of our species' history, 3 systems, 2 planets, and a population of little over 30 billion. The emotions I'm feeling right now cannot be accurately expressed with words, but one thing that can be said is what I'm going to do now. Every name was recorded, every betrayal remembered, every grand speech of our destined victory and subsequent immortality transcribed, and every glare at my family when we brought up peace remembered. The Triarch has failed us in a way that can never be forgiven nor forgotten. They took our great empire and dashed it on the rocks for their own glory and worthless pride. No longer will the people of the Tenok dynasty spill their blood for the Triarch's vainglory. We secede from the Necrontyr Empire and the Triarch, and will treat any violation of our space with open hostilities. May the Triarch and any one of those warmongers rot under their baleful suns, just like the young they sent to die did. This started the period known as the Second War of Secession, and it was such a horrific civil war that almost every faction, dynasty, and group took part in it. The violence, destruction, cruelty, distrust, and ruination that followed was almost total. For any trust between the dynasties had shattered into nothing over the long and cramped millennia of their new empire, so any potential target of importance was up for grabs. Civilian, religious, manufacturing, governmental, anything was destroyed to advance any one side's agenda, and was only fueling the hatred and division between the dynasties. In this time of almost complete societal collapse, the old ones could have returned at any moment and completely crushed the Necrontyr with little to no challenge. Why they didn't do so is up for debate. Some say it was a sense of pity for these cursed, angry, and violent creatures. Some say it was hubris that stayed their fleets, the complete belief that the Necrontyr could never again threaten them or their created child species. And some say it was a moral objection. For a species that creates so much life, it's not impossible to imagine that they would see completely ending a species as taboo, or at least in very bad taste. Truly, it doesn't matter why these powerful old ones didn't end the Necrontyr's pitiful existence in those years. All that does matter is that letting them live was a mistake the old ones, and the galaxy at large, would regret for the rest of existence. The Triarch, under the leadership of Silent King Cesaric, had never been so desperate. Even during the First War in Heaven, they still had plans to fall back on, people they could trust, and unity as a species. But now, they had almost nothing. The dynasties in open rebellion, their people poor and fearful, trust that their word would be heeded and trusted, gone. It was the scariest time for the Necrontyr leadership, and they knew just how weak their rule was in this post-war in heaven galaxy. And so, they searched everywhere and anywhere with the power they still held to try to find any bit of hope, any plan they could implement to fix the mistakes of their ancestors, and they needed to find it fast. It is uncertain if luck was on their side at this time or against them, for their salvation was indeed found, but the price that salvation desired was a steep one indeed. For that salvation was the Catan, massive beings of pure energy that were born on the universe's creation eons before even the Old One's birth. There are, however, conflicting reports on when the Necrontyr learned of the Catan's existence. Some Eldari sources say they merely happened upon the planet-sized entities by chance, from a random drone scan. Other sources say that the raw hatred the Necrontyr held towards the Old Ones as a race called out across the stars and acted as a beacon of sorts that the Catan could not ignore. While other sources state that the Necrontyr knew of these beings since before the War in Heaven, but never gave them much thought or research, merely seeing them as strange oddities in the galaxy. In fact, so many contradictory accounts, lies, fables, and misleading stories tell of how the Necrontyr found the Catan that it's impossible to know exactly how they first met. However, the Necrontyr and Triarch learned of these beings. Now that they were looking for any way to save themselves from total destruction, they researched these beyond ancient entities and learned many incredible things about them. First, they were parasitic in nature, for their main source of food were stars, where they latched onto and drained them of their energy, shortening the stars' lifespan by millions of years. They also seemed to fly through the vacuum of space on diaphanous wings, using the universe's electromagnetic flux as a sort of breeze to find other stars to feed off when their host star died. The most exciting discovery was, however, that these entities were in a way sentient, but not in the same way as you or I am sentient, but in a much more primal sentience, because these beings' bodies and minds were on a planetoid scale, going from one feeding source to another and caring little for the material planets they passed. Upon understanding what these beings are, the Triarch thought they had found the weapon they were looking for, a weapon to equal the power of the Old One's webway, and finally tip the power balance in their favor. When the Necrontyr public was shown these gigantic creatures, they saw them as the progeny of the death god the Necrontyr worshipped, and named them Catan, or star gods in their Necrontyr tongue. Just how the Necrontyr established communications with these beings must have been a truly incredible feat in of itself. What was truly the work of brilliance was the forging of these alien entities' physical forms. Indeed, some Necrontyr desired the favor of these star gods and worked to make physical forms for them to inhabit. This may seem counterintuitive to bring such a vast and powerful being into a small and potentially destroyable shell, but the star gods were not like material beings, and if they would help the Necrontyr get revenge on their most hated enemy, they would need to have the star gods see the galaxy as they themselves do. From here, we know very little about the process of making literal gods' bodies. The technology to let a being the size of a planet and with a will so obtuse as the star gods settle into a physical shell that is not 1,000th of their natural size is beyond anything the Adeptus Mechanicus can even comprehend, let alone understand. If the Necrontyr used advanced technology at all. For some at the Adeptus Mechanicus theorized that the Catan could always change their form, but either never needed to, for being smaller would only dampen how much solar energy they could absorb at once, or never even thinking of changing their size in the first place.
This might be the breaking point for me. Gigantic entities eating stars, beings the size of planets, having an alien sentience and willing to help us in our troubles? What a load of Triarch propaganda garbage. Everyone knows that this is the end for the United Necrontyr Empire. It will split apart into 2 to 3 dozen little kingdoms, all proclaiming they are the true continuation of the old Necrontyr Empire, and the Triarch saying such rubbish only proves that to me. If they exist, why would beings like that help a ruined race like ours? They apparently eat stars. Why would they care about the rocks floating in between them? Their power is like the stars themselves given form? Who says they won't use that power to remove the annoying planet dwellers bothering them? How can we trust each other with such power when we can't trust each other with weapons we already have? So many worries, but I know none will be taken seriously, because I know the look on the assembled overlords, lords, cryptex, and pharaohs' faces. It's hope. Hope that with this discovery our fate can be avoided. Hope that our days of glory and expansion may begin again. And no amount of logic can win over desperate hope like this. I have followed the will of the Triarch even after the War in Heaven's loss, for I truly believed splitting apart would doom us all. And while I still believe that, what the Triarch is saying and doing is so incredibly dangerous and reckless that it's making me question if I was right in picking their side in this conflict. Like I said, this might be the breaking point for me.
It is not hard at all to imagine what, in this time of utter turmoil that the Necrontyr Empire was in, the discovery and our research into the star gods caused much confusion and chaos, as each of the dynasties had different responses to the news. This would only become greater when news that some Necrontyr were actively making forms for these gods, and were wanting to use them as a trump card in a new war in heaven. I can only imagine the wars, espionage, backseat deals, and intrigue these beings caused in the courts of the Necrontyr Empire. But in the end, the forms were made for the Catan, and in fragmented and distorted legends of the Eldari, it said that, on bridges of starlight, translucent streamers of electromagnetic force could be seen across space, shifting and waving, as these star vampires coiled into their new material bodies. But these weren't just any shells the Necrontyr had made for the star gods. These bodies were made from the wonder material known as necrodermis. This material is an almost perfect metal. As its nickname attests, living metal has been seen flowing to mend even the most gruesome of damages. Bullet holes, explosives, lasers, blades, nothing alone can overcome necrodermis's automatic repair rate, as it flows to revert whatever damage done to it, almost as fast as the damage can be dealt. The only way to destroy something made from necrodermis is to completely overwhelm the repair rate by doing so much damage in such a short amount of time, the metal can no longer repair the damage instantly. But even then, it is not enough, for you might have destroyed the metal's cohesion, but the metal itself is not dead, even if you reduce the metal down to its atoms. Given enough time, the necrodermis will reform back into whatever shape it was created as, and in a staggering success rate. With the same wonder metal that they make their ships, the Necrontyr created monsters that even the stars themselves feared. The Catans are a greedy species, and supremely intelligent, so when they received material forms and saw the mass of beings that all had their hopes resting on their shoulders, they did what all greedy beings do. They exploited. Firstly, one of the many abilities their new bodies gave them is the ability to change form to whatever they would fancy, and what they chose showed their malevolent attitude right off the bat. If anyone had cared to look, that is. For the form they chose was the old gods of the Necrontyr. What happened next is unsurprising, as the Necrontyr saw these beings of nearly limitless power and knowledge appearing as their gods of old, and who they already believed to be the offspring of their death god. And such, the Necrontyr started worshipping the Catan as gods, and treated them as such. Very quickly after their transference to material form, the Catan learned about the myriad pleasures the material universe offered, and found something very interesting about the Necrontyr themselves. The Necrontyr, and all sentient life, gave off a bit of electromagnetic energy from their own bodies. And the kicker? It was delicious. So delicious, in fact, that it woke a new hunger in the Catan. Because for untold millennia, the star gods feasted on tasteless star energy, and never even thought food could be anything more than just for nutrition. But when this revelation of taste was made, the Catan could not control themselves. If the Catan knew what this new energy was, or the effect it would have when removed from its body, is unknown. But it would be foolish to give the Catan the benefit of the doubt, since their knowledge of the universe was godly compared to even the most advanced mortal races, old ones included. But the truth is that this energy was the very souls of the Necrontyr. Their souls were what the Catan became so obsessed over. But they kept this obsession a secret, and formed a plan to get as many souls as they possibly could. So, the Catan called Mephetren requested to come before the reigning Silent King Cesaric and his Triarch as a representative of the Catan as a whole. And Cesaric, unknowing of this Catan's true nature, agreed. At this time, the Necrontyr didn't really know much about the newly formed personalities of the Catan, since these creatures were so different and most likely viewed by the Necrontyr as babies learning about their new lives and their new material galaxy. But in truth, the Catan were already very aware of the galaxy, and intelligent beyond their understanding. Now, while we don't know how the Catans function, their hierarchy, or anything like that, we do know whoever made the decision, whoever picked Mephetren to be the representative of their whole species, chose the right Catan for the job. For the name Mephetren was what the Necrontyr called him, but to the Catan, his name was much more malevolent. The Deceiver was his name to his kin, for he was the star god of trickery, lies, manipulation, and deception. The Necrontyr were like putty in his hands, and when the Silent King approved of the Deceiver's request for an audience, the Catan wasted no time in spinning a wild tale. He spoke of a war of grand scale, from a time before the Necrontyr even existed, between the Catan and the Old Ones. In this war, the Catan were defeated, and him and his brothers slinked away, waiting for allies to take vengeance on their hated foe, and requested an alliance with the Necrontyr to burn the Old One's empire down to cinders. If this story is true is known to no one, as trickery and lies had become so ingrained into the Deceiver's soul that not even he could separate his truths from falsehoods. Truth or not, it offered everything the Necrontyr desired. In exchange for the alliance against the Old Ones, immortality, technology beyond the Necrontyr's wildest dreams, unity of people and purpose, and the most important of all, vengeance for both peoples. These things the Deceiver promised was not something that the Necrontyr needed to pay back for, as he insisted that these were merely boons to a valued ally, and needed for the vengeance they all craved. However, the hidden price for these boons were beyond the Necrontyr's wildest dreams. But the Silent King was listening, and listening closely, for he was like his predecessors, and lamented his people's division and plight in this radioactive corner of the galaxy. So, for many solar months, he debated the offer he was given with the other two members of the Triarch and his royal court. It was not hard to imagine emotions were high in these debates, as this was the chance they were all looking for. Unity, power, immortality, everything could be made right, and their race and their leadership could be redeemed. The only dissenting opinion came from Orican, the royal astrologer, for he foretold that this alliance with the star gods would indeed be a renaissance of glory for the Necrontyr, but would destroy the very soul of the Necrontyr people. If only he knew how right he was. But this opportunity could not be ignored, and desire, ambition, and hatred overcame caution. And one solar year after the Deceiver gave his speech, the Triarch agreed to the alliance, and put the Necrontyr on a path that there was no escape from. These Catan are bolder than we all thought. To think that one of them would approach the Silent King himself and tell of a tale similar to ours that they suffered from, and request an alliance of all things. When the Triarch told us about what the Catan Mephetren had said, and the technology the Catan would give us in return, I could see the Silent King's expression change. Normally, he wore a dour expression, but ever so slightly, like he was trying very hard to hold back, I could see a smile creep on his face. This gave what the others of the Triarch were saying that much more weight, for if the Silent King smiled, this must be one hell of an offer. And what weight those words had indeed. There is only one word that can describe the offer made by Mephetron: perfection. Technology, immortality, unity, and vengeance. You could see the change of the nobles' attitude on their faces as the story continued. See the fear, the desperation, the hopelessness, the stress get seemingly lifted from their features and replaced with wonder, hope, and comfort with the news of such powerful allies. When all was said and the debate started, it could hardly be called a debate, for everyone wanted to agree. For the first time in many generations, rival dynasties that had hated each other for so long that the reason for the rivalry had changed multiple times were agreeing with each other, talking with excitement with each other, and this was happening to multiple old rivalries during the debate. To say the atmosphere in the room was contagious would be an understatement, as even skeptical dynasties were by the middle fully on board with the Catan alliance. The only voice that was firm against the alliance was the old astrologer, Oricon. For he said he foretold glory indeed for the Necrontyr, but the gutting of its very soul. I must admit, I laughed at him. For what soul could we lose? We are a defeated race filled with hatred, division, and hopelessness. The glory and revitalization we would receive from this deal surely would outweigh any quote-unquote soul we would have to sacrifice. It took a full solar year, but after we have gone through every type of alliance we could think of, we will just agree to the Catan's original proposal, for he picked the best option right off the bat: equal partnership. The Silent King is going to officially announce the alliance later today, and I can't wait for my species and dynasty to finally become what we always were destined to be: supreme rulers of this galaxy. This part of Necrontyr history brings them close to what they are in the 41st millennium. For the Star Gods did good on their promises and immediately gave the Necrontyr technology beyond what any mortal could have given. Ships that could travel across the galaxy faster than even the old ones. Weapons that made the Star Killers the Necrontyr already had look like mere toys. Communications that allowed a true and unified galactic empire to form, and many other godlike technological revelations were given and then integrated into Necrontyr society. To the average Necrontyr, seeing these star beings that can give wonders that they could have never imagined possible, who possess power of the gods themselves and a common goal with them, it was not long till the Necrontyr started worshipping them as the very gods they had named them, and whose form the Catan took. This worship made the benefactors of the Catans into servants. And so, in this time of advancement, the Catan were worshipped as gods and reveled in the privileges that entailed them. Millions of slaves, palaces the size of countries, their every whim heeded to the letter or beyond, and every other tyrannical demand was heeded. For the Catan were not benevolent, but greedy, obsessive, cruel, capricious, and forever hungry. And in this time, they feasted on the life forces of uncountable slaves, in an act of gluttony only gods can truly achieve. But, with these new miracle technologies bestowed upon them, the Necrontyr were ready to get their long overdue revenge on the Old Ones for their humiliating defeat in the First War in Heaven. But the Catan were not done gifting their servants with powers beyond their imagination. Now, before we get into that final gift, we must first talk about how the Necrontyr could have recovered enough to wage a galactic-scale war after getting ruined so completely. First, we don't know how long the rebuilding period lasted, for seemingly all the data talking about time frames were lost or well hidden. So we could only make some guesses on the length using Terran estimates. The Necrontyr at this time were contained in their homeworld system, in the small top left corner of the galaxy, and were forbidden from expanding. This made the habitable worlds they could settle in, given gas giants, dead worlds, and hostile worlds taking up the celestial neighborhood, few and vital to the rebuilding efforts. In addition to this, their population were undoubtedly devastated from the First War in Heaven, and with such short lifespans, the number of years it would require to replenish their numbers would be lengthy. The length of time the Necrontyr had with the Catan before the Second War in Heaven is known just as much as the rebuilding period. So the theory I have to explain how the Necrontyr were able to gain the populations needed for such a war is the time the Necrontyr had with the Catan before the Second War in Heaven was quite long, and the new Necrontyr generations were bolstered with Catan terraforming technologies, quick colonization of previously uninhabitable worlds, Catan medical advancements, and the Necrontyr's own birth rates being high to counter their low lifespans. This theory I find to be the most realistic, since given that the Catans each had millions of slaves, the Necrontyr population must have been growing rapidly to support it. This theory covers a surprisingly big population the Necrontyr had at the beginning of the Second War in Heaven, and explains how the Necrontyr could implement such advanced technologies so fast after learning them. Now, back to the Catan's final gift. The fabled immortality the Necrontyr had been craving for since before their great empire was across the stars. This was the final gift the Catan had for the Necrontyr. And this immortality was in the form of mechanical transcendence. The Necrontyr would discard their weak and blighted organic flesh and exist in bodies made from the very living metal their gods were made from, necrodermis. Their bodies would never age, never grow sick, never fail, or even if the most grievous damage was inflicted upon them, they would repair themselves in a matter of moments. With these bodies and the Catan's mystical technology, the destruction of the hated Old Ones was all but guaranteed. It was everything the Necrons could dream of. And so, with the pact sealed, construction began. Across every world, on every continent, and in every city, biotransference sites were constructed, and in them, colossal cyclopean biofurnaces raged. Night and day, for an unknown length of time, the Silent King's people marched into these furnaces to be turned into a more perfect version of themselves. What horrific procedures happened within those furnaces cannot be known, as the science behind them would most likely make you go mad, but without a doubt, any that entered were stripped of flesh and transferred into a mechanical form. But it wasn't only the flesh that these colossal machines stripped the Necrontyr of. This entire time, the Catan were hiding their true desire with this ascension of the Necrontyr. For the very soul of the Necrontyr was their true goal. The biofurnaces stripped the Necrontyr of their souls, with only the bare minimum left to operate their new robotic forms. This soul matter was ejected from the tops of the great machines, and the Catans, in their original energy-based forms, swooped and dived to consume every last bit. Their greed and lust for souls of mortals finally revealed to the horror of the Silent King. When the Silent King emerged from the process, he felt better than he had in many solar decades, for the plagued flesh he had dealt with for his entire life was now gone. In its stead, he felt power in his words, vigor in his step, an extreme swift and clear mind, and mightiness within his new form. However, there was a slight problem. An emptiness in his mind, a type of hollowness that defied explanation. His soul, it was gone. And as he looked at the star god swooping, devouring, and partying above the furnaces, he remembered the old seer's warning. This alliance with the star gods would indeed be a renaissance of glory for the Necrontyr, but would destroy the very soul of the Necrontyr people. The Silent King was shocked beyond words. He never imagined the soul he'd be forfeiting would be his literal soul, and that of his people as well. As the Silent King looked upon his reborn people, what he saw spawned despair in his robotic heart, for the once vibrant species were now soulless, emotionless, memoryless, and completely obedient machines. The Necrontyr were no more. Only the Necrons remained. Like the Catan promised, everyone became an immortal machine, from the lowliest peasant to the mightiest lord, but the transformation was not the same for every individual. For the vast majority, it reduced them down to a servile machine, taking commands, doing said commands, and nothing more. But for the most headstrong, driven, or stubborn Necrontyr, they kept more of their former selves. While this sort of perseverance affected the ruling class the most, many cryptecs also kept their minds. But while some kept their minds, all of these new Necrons had a command protocol embedded into their minds. This gave the Silent King complete control over his subjects with no objections allowed. Along with this massive transformation, the Catan also changed. For with the Catan's consumption of an entire race's souls, their power was now that of a star cluster rather than a single star, and their egos inflated to fit their new powers. Funnily enough, many Necrontyr were okay with losing their souls to the Catan. They saw the benefits their gods gave adequate for the price they paid, and reveled under their gods' power and plans for the future. Even with these substantial negatives, not everyone agreeing with those who accepted the price, the Star Gods had upheld their end of the bargain, and the Necrons now had to uphold their end. The war with the Old Ones must commence anew, and the Old Ones this time were in for a time of their lives.
I, Cryptek Istil of the Transmogrification Conclave, was one of the willing Necrontyr to enter those colossal furnaces at the behest of the Tribe. These machines were unlike anything I'd seen before, for that was commonplace in regards to technology the gods had invented, but when I exited the furnace, I felt different in a way I could not explain. Slightly empty, but strong in a way I could imagine our race never knew before this day. It was a good feeling, a feeling of the bright future to come. It has been 6 full planet rotations since then, and I must write down just how big of a difference the transformation has done to me and my colleagues' lives, or I just might not believe it's really happening. It took 2 full rotations to fully come to terms with how this new body functions, and an average of 3.5 with the rest of my colleagues. But after that, productivity shot up 657% overnight. Experiments that would have normally taken weeks to plan and execute now took mere minutes. Mental blocks that had plagued myself and more than half of my conclave were easily broken through, and having perfectly obedient test subjects and assistants that have no self-preservation instincts are beyond helpful. Only 6 planet rotations after our ascendance, and we are gaining new members, expanding our facilities into different types of study, keeping our rivals in check, and growing and standing with the Triarch by the day. Whatever our gods did to us in those colossal machines, whatever they took as payment, it was worth the sacrifice.
The Second War in Heaven started soon after the Necrontyr's ascension to Necrons. Their hate long stoked, their weapons primed and ready, their people now built for war, and the Catan hungering for the souls of the living. The Catan and their servants descended upon the galaxy like a wave of destruction. What happened in this war made their first war in heaven look like a minor fleet engagement, for this time, the Old Ones had to use their full might. Planets were razed, suns blinked out, entire planetary populations consumed, whole star systems devoured by black holes that the Catan called forth at the whim. The Necrons were more powerful than they ever were, and poured their generations upon generations of pain and suffering onto the galaxy. All the while, their thirsting gods delighted. No corner of the galaxy was safe. From every angle the Necrons came and attacked, and the Old Ones' younger races, who they cared so dearly for, were not safe. Their fortresses were besieged and overcame by the Necrons, and their dead consumed by the Catans. But that was not all the defeated younger races would endure. The Necrons and their Catan masters were cruel and unusual masters, killing who they wanted with no regrets, consuming entire portions of the population to feed the endless hunger of the Catans at the moment's notice, and working the rest to the bone to harvest what they could to feed the war effort. But it was the Catan called Nydrazath that would ring the Old One's death knell. For he was a Catan of endless burning, a being that only wanted to burn the galaxy, and when he looked upon the Old One's hidden dimension, this webway, he desired nothing more than to spread his eldritch flames into it. And he just knew how to breach its defenses. He called them dolmen gates. These living stone viruses could pierce the defenses of the webway, and while not permanent entrances like the organic portals the Old Ones had constructed, they lasted long enough for the Necrons to travel to their intended location. These gates didn't last forever because the webway knew when it was being attacked, and it had a myriad of defenses in place to stop any invasion. But its creators had never imagined beings like the Catan. You can imagine the tactical advantage this gave the Necrons. The Old Ones and the species they gave webway access to no longer had a perfect retreat option. They could never know when the Necrons would send an invasion fleet right to the center of their core worlds from their own transportation system. It's also safe to assume that the Old Ones had relied heavily on the webway for civilian travel too, so their transport ships, civilian ships, and supply ships are now under threat. For a peace-loving race, this would have been a loss to their overwhelming advantage, and I highly doubt they had an answer for it, for its loss was the end for the Old One's empire. This victory over the webway marked the almost complete victory for the Necrons. The Old Ones were now in lone bastions under constant siege, trying in vain to survive the onslaught, and in this time of victory, the galaxy ran red. For the Catan's endless hunger knew no bounds, and they consumed world after world after world. No one was safe from their appetite. But so greedy was the Catans that they overconsumed. The galaxy was very quickly running out of life, and the Catan's greed was only increasing as days went by. It's no surprising what happened next, but the Aldari claimed their laughing god was responsible for sparking it off. He tricked the Catan, known as the Outsider, into starting it all. The Catan started consuming each other. The beings that could destroy entire solar systems at a whim started fighting each other. The destruction was impossible to comprehend. Cities built with 1,000,000 hands tore down in a second. Worlds once brimming with life turned into nothing but floating rocks in space by being hit by a stray mind-numbing attack. For the Catan gain energy and power with every soul they consume. And now, not only have they consumed the entirety of the Necrontyr, but they also consumed almost the entire galaxy. It is not heretical to think that if they wanted to, they could have destroyed the galaxy itself at this point. But they didn't. And at the end of this age of godly conflict, only the few strongest Catan remained, having consumed all of the others. And at this time, the galaxy was in such a state that the Old Ones, who were known for their godlike patience, saw what had become of the galaxy and grew desperate to save it, for they knew that all life in the galaxy was inevitably doomed under the rule of the Catan, so they created a plan that would save themselves in the short term, but release a threat more dangerous, insidious, and cruel than even the Catan. For the Old Ones still had a trump card, the thing that kept them alive even after beings that could shape the material universe at their will sought their destruction. Their mastery and access to the realm of souls, or, as it is called in the 41st millennium, the warp. It was their trump card because to even access the realm of souls, you, need a soul, and the Necrons had theirs consumed. For the Catan, it is not known if they have souls, but it is known that the power of the realm of souls was beyond their reach, and they despised it for that very reason. So, using their mastery of this extraplanar realm and their vast knowledge of genetic engineering, they went to create servants with incredible psychic aptitude as direct counters of the galaxy's foes. They created many warrior species in their search for perfection. This included the Aldari, a humanoid, supremely intelligent, extremely long-lived, highly warp-sensitive, quite quick, strong, and cunning species. The Rashan, who we only know by name since it is most likely that they went extinct in the Second War of Heaven. The Knib, 10-limbed warriors that, in the 41st millennium, are known to invade worlds and raid them. They also are speculated to use a beast called a Clawed Fiend as shock troops, so perhaps these were designed as a type of beast tamer species for the Old Ones in their war. The Jakero, beings that resemble old Terran orangutans, but can craft advanced technology seemingly from instinct, and are cared for and highly sought after for these very traits by the Imperium of Man. And perhaps their most infamous creation, the Krork. These beings are the ancient ancestors of the Orcs, and were infinitely more dangerous at their creation than they are now. They were aggressive, relentless, decently intelligent, very tough, massive, standing at times 12 feet tall, clad in advanced armor, and have a love for fighting to the point of all-consuming. These beings are still a threat 60 million years later, which should tell you their fighting prowess. And with these beings at their side, and after a millennium of hiding away and cultivating these species, the Old Ones were finally ready to strike back out, and hopefully end the bloody horror that conquered the galaxy.
The lizard gods created us for one purpose. From the very beginning, the lizard gods have been raising our species. From my great-great-great-grandfather, all the way to me, they have been our protectors, shielding us from the chaos of the wider galaxy that they speak of. They tell of great wars, enemy gods of unimaginable power, a race of destroyers the likes the galaxy has never seen before, and our purpose in said war. They speak of others like us, young ones who they have crafted and protected, beings that we will fight alongside when the time is right. Our one purpose? The war in heavens that will either be the galaxy's doom, or its lesson on the dangers of open hatred. Either way, we are not yet ready, but we will be. And when we are, we will not be found wanting.
But that will have to wait till next episode, because this episode has already gone long, and we already have gone through all of the Necrontyr's history and the beginning of the Necrons. And with this, you can now see why the Necrons turned out as they did. As vindictive, hateful, jealous, soulless machines of death, since their history started with an unbeatable curse, and even if they've conquered one curse, another immediately took its place. But don't worry, the Necrons aren't totally thralls to the genocidal gods of the universe. There is some of what they once were still in those metal frames, and we will discuss that in the next episode. In the next episode, I will tell you about the Old Ones' retribution, go more in depth about the races they created, the effects making so many extremely powerful psychic races had on the realm of souls, the eldritch horrors that befell the galaxy upon the creation of the warp, the great uprising of the Necrons, and the exodus of the Silent King, and the Necrons from the galactic stage. Till then, don't forget to like if you did, and let me know in the comments if you like this style of video and what part of the Necrons' history stood out to you. And remember, one last thing, if giant star vampires offer you immortality, prepare for their conditions to be very on the nose. Like these tiny Terran creatures, they too could have evolved a great resistance to radiation, but not an immunity, hence their lifespan reduction and other woes. With death being so close to every member of their species, it created a culture where life was